Subnautica 2 was supposed to launch into early access this year. It had been in development for several years, ever since Unknown Worlds, the studio behind the original, was acquired by Krafton back in 2021. By all appearances, things were on track. Internal playtests had begun, wish lists were piling up, and the studio was quietly preparing for early access this summer. Then, something changed. The studio's founders were mysteriously fired, and the game was delayed. Soon after, a very strange story began to emerge. Krafton described it as a necessary step, a tough call made because the game just wasn't ready for release, even in early access. But according to others close to the project, that's not what happened at all. What followed was a wave of internal leaks, press interviews, and a very public back and forth, all culminating in a breach of contract lawsuit against Krafton. So we're left with two competing narratives, one painting the decision as responsible, the other calling it calculated. I've read the articles, I've seen the opinion pieces, and throughout it all, I keep coming back to the same question. Why would a publisher delay a game that developers say is ready and that millions of people are ready to buy? So to figure this out, we need to look at both sides of the story. Because depending on who you believe, you'll arrive at very different answers to this question. Either it was a difficult but responsible decision by the publisher, or a calculated move to avoid a massive payout. There are no easy answers here, but by looking closely at both narratives, we can ask which one best fits the timeline and which one makes the most sense in light of the facts. Let's begin with the story as Krafton tells it. According to Krafton, the decision to delay Subnautica 2 wasn't about money, it was about quality. Internally, there were concerns the game simply wasn't ready, not even for early access. Progress had been slow, key systems weren't coming together, and in their view, the leadership wasn't providing enough direction. In a statement released to the press, Krafton claimed the studio's founders had abandoned the responsibilities entrusted to them, and that Subnautica 2 had faced, quote, repeated confusion in direction and significant delays. And to back up their concerns, Krafton pointed to an internal review. Slides from that review, later leaked to Bloomberg, outlined a number of issues the company believed needed to be addressed before the launch. According to internal testers, Subnautica 2 was missing several foundational systems and key content targets. The core gameplay loop wasn't clearly defined, progression felt unrewarding, and several major features that were supposed to be in the early access build simply weren't there. Among the missing content included 2 biomes, 1 Leviathan-class creature, a new vehicle, reportedly named the Trident, a dedicated game mode, 6 hours of narrative content, multiple creatures and tools, and character customization features. The review also criticized the lack of innovation compared to the original game, saying there were no real wow moments or standout features to set it apart. One slide noted, quote, the game lacks the level of polish and market impact required to drive IP growth and expansion. The reviewers recommended holding back release until the team could polish the game to better appeal to a broader market. And if the game was going to launch in early access, they advised doing so only with a, quote, MVP level build that allows players to experience the core loop at a high level of quality. In short, Krafton's internal verdict was clear. Releasing in 2025 wasn't just premature, it was risky. Risky for the franchise, risky for player perception, and risky for the company's reputation. So they made a call. The founding leadership was removed, the game was delayed, and a new plan was put in place to bring Subnautica 2 up to standard. Krafton also announced that the team would still be eligible for a $25 million bonus pool, presenting it as a show of commitment to the remaining developers, even as the original agreement expired along with the exit of the former leadership. They described the new arrangement as more equitable, claiming the average employee would now receive a larger share of the bonus pool than they would have under the original plan. According to Krafton, nearly 90% of the original $250 million bonus was set to go to the same executives they had just removed. So that's the story as Krafton tells it. A game in trouble, a team in need of direction, and a publisher stepping in to keep the project alive. But there is another version of events. And in this one, Krafton isn't saving the project, they're sabotaging it. In early 2025, the founders of Unknown Worlds met with Krafton to share updated revenue projections. They were optimistic. Ports of the original Subnautica were coming to mobile and Switch 2, and Subnautica 2 had already racked up millions of wish lists on Steam. These projections mattered. You see, Krafton's acquisition of Unknown Worlds included a bonus clause. Up to $250 million if the studio hit certain revenue targets by 2026. To put that in perspective, Krafton paid about $500 million for the acquisition in the first place. So this bonus alone represented half the total value of the deal. According to the lawsuit, the projections made it clear. They were on track to hit that target. And not just hit it, crush it. The founders even pushed to expand bonuses to employees who hadn't been part of the original acquisition. They wanted the reward to be shared more broadly across the team. But that's when everything changed. Krafton's behavior reportedly shifted. Marketing support dried up, localization efforts stalled, vendors went unpaid, emails went unanswered. One Krafton executive allegedly told CEO Ted Gill that pulling support was a, quote, permissible way to avoid helping the game hit its targets. Then came the internal review. Remember that negative report Krafton cited to justify delaying the game? This is when it was commissioned. According to the lawsuit, the review came after those optimistic revenue projections, not before, raising serious questions about its timing and intent. Shortly after, Krafton offered to renegotiate the original bonus structure. The exact amount they offered isn't publicly known, but it would have significantly reduced the potential payout. The founders reportedly declined, and days later, they were fired. Krafton claimed that they had abandoned their leadership responsibilities. But according to the lawsuit, Charlie Cleveland, one of those founders, was actively working on a Subnautica film project that Krafton themselves had greenlit. What followed was a string of internal leaks, documents and slides from that same internal review Krafton had cited. These were published by Bloomberg, and notably, Krafton didn't deny their contents. In fact, they confirmed the leak's authenticity, effectively putting their own damaging internal assessment into the public record. Which raises an obvious question. Why would a publisher confirm damaging information about their own game unless they were trying to control the narrative? Even when a game is struggling, publishers almost never go public. They downplay concerns, reassure fans, hype up progress. But in this case, Krafton verified a leak that painted Subnautica 2 as a game in serious trouble, leading many to assume the leak was intentional. So let's recap the two stories. In Krafton's version, Subnautica was behind schedule, key systems weren't working, major content was missing, and leadership had lost focus. So they stepped in, delayed the game, removed the founders, and restructured the bonus to better reward the average worker. According to them, it wasn't about money, it was about quality. In the founders' version, everything was on track. The game was nearly ready for early access. Revenue projections looked strong, and the founders even asked to extend bonuses to employees outside the original deal. Then things changed. Communications dried up, support vanished, a last-minute review appeared, Krafton tried to renegotiate the bonus, and when the founders declined, they were fired. Which brings us back to the question I asked at the beginning. Why would a publisher delay a game that developers say is ready and that millions of players are eager to buy? Which version of events best answers this question? If Krafton's version is true, that they did it for quality reasons, it's hard to overstate how rare that would be. Publishers are almost always the ones pushing for early releases, cutting corners to hit financial targets, while developers beg for more time. CD Projekt Red knew Cyberpunk wasn't ready, but under pressure from shareholders, it was pushed out the door to hit the holiday window. The result? One of the most infamous launches in gaming history. And then there's Battlefield 2042. That game skipped proper QA and shipped with game-breaking bugs, missing features, and a broken scoreboard. EA admitted they rushed it, and paid the price in both reputation and revenue. So when a publisher not only delays a game, but confirms a damaging internal review to the press, that's not just rare, it's almost unheard of. And it gets stranger, because this wasn't even a full release. Subnautica 2 was headed to early access, a stage where players expect bugs, missing content, and rough edges. That's the whole point. Early access is a way to involve the community, gather feedback, and build towards a finished product in public. No one was expecting perfection. And according to anonymous playtesters, the game already had more content than most early access titles. So if Krafton was worried about protecting its reputation, from what exactly? An early access launch was never going to damage the brand, especially not for a beloved franchise like Subnautica. If anything, delaying it raised more eyebrows than releasing it ever would have. Now, we may never know for certain who's telling the truth, but which version of events best explains the delay? A publisher so concerned about quality that they delayed an early access game, one that millions of players were ready to buy? Or a publisher trying to avoid a $250 million payout? Of course, it's possible Krafton is just the most conscientious publisher in history, but is that really where you'd put your money? Hey, if you made it this far, thank you so much for watching. If you liked what you heard, please like, subscribe, and definitely leave a comment down below, because I'd love to hear your thoughts on this Subnautica 2 situation. Do you agree? Disagree? Either way, I'm happy to hear from you. Thanks again. Have a great day.